coming. Thank you for all the students who agreed to give these lightning talks. Looks like we have more opportunity to see our awesome students going. Yes. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I just thought I would include this since I was going first. There's a few folks from Soil, Water, and Climate that are going to be presenting next week at the it's the UMN Earth Student Symposium. So it's from a bunch of different departments, including ESI and Civil and Environmental, Geoengineering, and SWAC. And they basically organized this small symposium to get posters and oral talks that are focused on earth science together. So that'll be next Friday. So I just thought I would promote it a little bit. We got a few good representation. So
yeah, worth traveling to the Minneapolis campus for.
Yeah, it's over.
Someone who never goes to the Minneapolis campus. I won't say that. Okay. Well, this is Trey Maddaleno. He is a PhD student with Dylan Mullane. He's going to be our first lightning talk. What time limit have you guys given yourselves? Do you want us to keep you on time, or you just want to finish your talk?
You can, get me off stage with a clerk if you want. I said
keep a little time.
Yeah, we're going 5 minutes, right? Or 5-ish?
Yeah, 5-ish.
Okay.
5-ish is fine.
Hold me to it. All right. Thank you for the introduction. How do I apologies. Right, clicking on this. There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Trey. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide observations that we did in New York and what they tell us about the urban atmosphere. As you may well know, carbon dioxide is an important greenhouse gas, the most abundant one, and its main source is combustion. And because of its effect on the climate, we do want to track and perhaps even reduce our emissions, which is kind of tough. When you talk about measuring something, you're not directly measuring the emissions most of the time. You're measuring something like concentration and then going back to the emissions. And this is also complicated by the fact that there are other factors like sinks. Carbon dioxide is also taken up during photosynthesis, which impacts that correlation between the emissions and what we measure as the mixing ratio. I think we can get closer to the emissions that we want to know about by leveraging information, especially other gases like carbon monoxide, which is more exclusively associated with combustion. One really powerful tool we can use is called eddy covariance, which we tie together fast measurements of wind and trace gases like carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, and tie together the fact that most of the vertical transport going on is due to these turbulent eddies. And by combining those two measurements, we can get this kind of integrated footprint or this ecosystem scale net exchange that captures both the source and the sink, which is really powerful. And we did this in New York in this kind of urban environment on Long Island. You can see here there's this urban environment that includes both residential, this traffic sector, as well as a good number of trees, active biosphere. We were out there in summer 2023 and a little period in winter 2024. So we get a period where the biosphere is active and when it's not. And I think it's really cool that we got a suite of comprehensive measurements out there to get a snapshot of the urban atmosphere. Here, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of our data. These are average day plots, basically, for each period. So on the x-axis is an hour of day, so how the emissions change throughout the day. On the y-axis is the flux, which is mostly made up of emissions. One of the big takeaways is that traffic emissions are dominating. As you can see, we see a positive number, and we also get patterns that we would associate with traffic. We see this morning rush hour associated peak, and we also see a difference between the weekday in blue, that's higher, and a lower flux on the weekend in orange. I can zoom out a little bit. This includes carbon dioxide on top, both for the winter period, and then carbon monoxide flux on bottom. I do want to draw your attention to the fact that we see this higher carbon dioxide net flux in winter, which my first thought when I saw this was, is this due to increased emissions in the winter, like perhaps more inefficient combustion, or is this due to the lack of the biosphere taking some of the carbon dioxide out? This is a plot that shows a similar period. Here I include this kind of May through June period as well. This is the carbon dioxide flux for these different periods. You again see that that's higher in the winter. And I'm asking the question of what's changing. We can pull in the carbon monoxide flux, which again, I said is more associated with this combustion and doesn't cycle through the biosphere. It's much more static across seasons, which could be a hint that these traffic emissions are maybe not changing so much. And it is, in fact, a change in the biosphere that we're detecting and the changes in the carbon dioxide flux. And on the bottom here, I kind of take this flux ratio. So this is carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide. So higher up on the plot means there's less CO2. So there's CO2 being removed is how I interpreted that. And we see this change throughout the day. So we see this increase throughout the day, which I interpret suggesting that there's this carbon dioxide removal through the biosphere on the daily time scale. And in fact, we even see this weakest in the winter, where we'd expect the biosphere to be the least active. Bringing in another information source to kind of help us interpret this, we're using an emissions inventory. This one is called Prates. And that's a bottom-up estimate, basically using the idea about, an estimate of how many cars are on the road and what each car emits to kind of estimate total emissions for a given area. And I will note here that emissions are not the same as flux. Our flux includes emissions, but also includes removal, like through the biosphere. So where these differ, it can tell us something. Here, I plot them on the same plot. So this stacked color plot is different sectors within the emissions inventory. The blue one is gas from traffic emissions, and then there's a bunch of others. In the dotted line is our observed flux versus that. And I think some of the big takeaways are that we don't see, rather, I think the inventory is overestimating this afternoon emissions peak. It tends to be much higher in the inventory compared to what we measure in this dotted line, which could just be a difference in traffic change or what it expects to see. But it does actually see this increase in winter carbon dioxide emissions, which it assigns to differences in space heating, both commercial and residential, which kind of complicates my theory that a lot of that increase that we see is due to the lack of the biosphere uptake. So the big takeaways are that urban flux measurements are complex to interpret, but I think they're useful. And complementary flux measurements can help us decode the complex environment. And then finally, acknowledging everybody, and good science takes a good team. So thank you. Do we get time for questions? Thanks, sir.
If you throw in one more tracer to constrain your questions, what they will be?
Great question. I think the most prominent one which we did in fact measure, we also had a mass spectrometer out there, a proton transfer reaction mass spectrometer, which allows us to measure something like isoprene, which is maybe a good tracer for the biosphere. I think if we have information about the biosphere as well as that, I think that would add some more information. That's just like a much less common measurement, even compared to carbon monoxide, which is not used in the flux framework a lot. So I was hoping to constrain it with just carbon monoxide, but information about the biosphere more exclusively would also be helpful here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You said that during the day is lower, CO2 level is lower. Without, you saw some graphs that you said it tends to decrease through the day, and I was expecting it should increase through the day.
The carbon dioxide should increase throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
It's complicated. Even in some of our, I think here I show some of this. We see this increase throughout the day as we kind of approach that rush hour period. And then in the spring, especially, we kind of see this almost dip, I think, when there's kind of a drop in both traffic and the biosphere is coming online. So it's, most active, the most sunlight around that kind of noon hour. And then we see that again, that kind of rise in the afternoon peak, but we don't see quite as big of an afternoon increase as what the emissions inventory expects.
What's the area that you are confident that it's actually monitoring?
Yeah, that's a big question with a lot of flux measurements. I don't have a figure with me, but I'll bring up this photo. You know, there's a few models to, you know, kind of help interpret what source region is influencing your measurements, but it's, you know, within a few city blocks, and it's most influenced by things that are closer to the tower. So a lot of our influence is from that traffic sector.
Do you monitor the biomass in that area as to how that could be influencing?
I've not used that analysis, but that is an idea, basically using how much of the footprint is impermeable surface versus, you know, a more versus active tree canopy. I think there's something there, but I haven't gone too far onto that front. Should I take one more? Am I going long?
Just curious, like, do you have an idea if it's too different from agricultural lands? Or slopes?
In terms of the biosphere component, like if I compared this to like a grassland or a cropland.
So during your review, did you see any numbers that would relate?
I don't have a good reference for it off the top of my head. I would anticipate it to be lower. I've read some stuff where people aren't using so much eddy covariance, but still try and estimate what the carbon dioxide flux, and it can be comparable, especially in some of the more densely tree laden neighborhoods. They can have a pretty significant carbon dioxide exchange. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Great.
Okay, next we have Azucena, who is a PhD student with Kyung-Soo. Oh, you guys were already, weren't you? Your slides are, no, they're not, they're separate. Come up and show me which one is yours, Azucena. Oh, this is you, Sarah.
Temperature.
Wait, that looks like you, right?
Yeah.
The Sarah up there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So today I want to talk about farming on a slope, wide soil temperature reveals in the driftless area, which is going to be just a preliminary result of what we were working on with Kyung-Soo in those regions with our vegetable farming. So as introduction, it's well known that temperature is a key driver of biological activities, water dynamics, and also influence the crop development. And also the slope position or the geometry of the landscape is associated with variation in soil properties that influence runoff, drainage, soil temperature, and erosion and deposition, and also affect crop yields. However, most of the study that has been conducted studying some of the temperature has been in flat areas and forested areas and not including agricultural lands. So for this, in this study, we asked how does topography or the slope position influence soil temperature in complex agricultural landscape like those found in driftless area. So this is the area of the study. We choose 4 different farms in this area, as you can see in the map. And also this landscape is located in the upper Midwest, which has a complex landscape and sort of a part of which is included in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. As objective of this study is to understand how this soil temperature varies across different slope positions, and whether topography acts as a control to control soil temperatures across different farms and across the slope position. So at the beginning, we thought that soil valley positions would exhibit lower temperatures and also lower variability compared to ridge areas, which will be more higher temperatures and also higher variability. And also some of the influences that will contribute to this, it would be the spatial distribution of those plots that we install the temperature sensors. So those temperature sensors were installed, especially across those 4 different farms, where we can see their location in these plots, where in Featherstone is the only farm where we have more, they are separated more farther apart from each other. And all the other 3 farms, those locations were closer to each other. So as a methodology, this data is from 2024. So I'm just starting my analysis for 2024, and then we're gonna have 2025 and 2026 probably. So some of those temperatures were installed all the temperature sensors were installed at 20 centimeters depth. Some of them recorded a temperature measurement every 5 minutes, and some of them every 4 hours. So I standardized the data for every 4 hours. So we focus in the period in the early growing season, which is from April at the end of April and at the beginning of May, because those farmers, they want to start tilling and we cannot have the sensors there. And I did it for the four different farms. Some farms I have 3 different slope locations, and the others I have just 2 locations, which is the ridge and then the valley, as we see in the plots. And here I'm installing the sensors there in the picture. Some of the results that we have is that the temperature rise over time across all the slope, as we can see in those figures. But ridges and back slopes tend to be more variable, while valleys remain more stable or more buffer. They start raise from April, at the end of April, at the beginning of May. So we just recorded a few days for these results. And also we have for Pearson, for the other farm, similar patterns where ridge has more variability compared to the valley areas, which is associated with the moisture level in those valley regions. And also we have as a result that for Dancing Gnome, similar pattern, but in the valley, those variation tends to change slightly. And in Featherstone, because we attributed to the spatial location of those plots, that could influence that the effect is reversed, where valley have more variability in temperature or is more warmer compared to the ridge area, which we were expecting to find. So this summarizes the results. This table is just that shows that higher variability, the ridges showing higher variability in temperature extreme, where we compare the amplitude, and this is consistent across all farms. So we can see that those red values, the amplitude is quite large, and in Driftless Organics the same, and in Featherstone, and just with the temperature beside that switch, but the amplitude of those changes are quite large. And we can see that also corroborated by the coefficient of variation. And valley seems to act as a thermal buffers with lower variability. And some of the farm-specific conditions observed in Featherstone confirm those patterns too, that the spatially distribution, probably the location of these plots influence more than if we evaluate the same slope position in these areas. So the key message to take away is that topography, it can primarily drive a soil temperature variability, but its effects are also context dependent, especially when we are studying across large landscape, which is the driftless area, which was more spread around those plots. If they were more spread around, this doesn't play anymore like the, and then when it's closer, the plots are closer to each other with the same landscape position, seems to be consistent across 3 farms that we studied. So valley areas are showing lower variability in a smaller temperature range, and ridges, as in fact they are they're getting warmer faster, but also cool down faster if like at the beginning of the growing season, which is very important for the farmers to know this, or how fast they can start growing. Yeah, thank you. Oh, any questions?
Yeah. Can you say more about what was going on at Featherstone? What was unique about that site?
One of the unique things about it was that in the flat areas, it was more, the difference between the landscape was more, they were separated, especially farther apart compared to those areas that was, we decided to call it ridge because we basically drive in a right to that side, which is the slope condition where they are farming, but it's not close to each other. The difference between those 3 other farms is like, it's the same slope conditions. So basically we had the upper and then the valley in the same area. So that influence, so the patterns are consistent across the same area, but not across when you go through from basically from the landscape perspective is not, what especially is not the same. So that's why. That's why you obviously show in the graph that the temperature is varied. It's the reverse, it's the opposite. So we could think that also in this rich area could be slightly flat. So that prime that is wetter, or they also try apply manure or the maintain slightly more more stable, we would say. Any other question?
I'm wondering about the ground cover of the different sites. So thinking about the reflectivity or albedo, where was there similarity in the ground cover? Different parts?
Yeah, it were some similarities in some of the plots we study. Most of them are completely exposed, so we are measuring also as of other like solar radiation, if that can cause effects of how much we actually receiving there, if it's drying faster or is drying slower, because moisture content is also directly linked to temperature. So some of them cover have very similar in the valleys specifically, but in the reaches, that's why it seems to change. And also the standard deviation is quite high. So it seems that more of the reaches are more variable, that they have down, they have some trees, but it's not completely covered, or they just farming lands, vegetable farming lands.
Okay. Exactly. Okay. Next we have Elise, who is maybe a little newer to our department than some people. She is working with me and Grace Wilson over in BBE on a project. Lots of good expertise to offer us. That's it. This is it. Yeah. Great. And you're going to present some data from your PhD in Brazil. Great. Thank you. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Alice. Oh,
Sorry about that. I'll help you.
oh, there it goes. Yeah. Okay.
Just slow. Presentation on tigers.
So,
Oh, did the Zoom thing change?
Oh,
It is?
it is.
Thank you, Aria.
Oh, I can see the title. Well, hi everyone, I am Alice. I am currently a postdoc at BBE, but what I'm going to be telling you today is what I did during my PhD and my master's. This was my study area. These are acrosols being eroded away. That's just to give you an idea of what the landscape is like. And this is where I spent a lot of days and nights monitoring rainfall events. Okay, I wanted to paint you a picture of what happened in May 2024 in my home state, Rio Grande do Sul. In late April, we started getting rainfall all over the state, and that was just unprecedented in volume. And about half the area of the state drains towards Porto Alegre. That's our capital city. And there we have this Guaíba Lake, which is a lake but acts like a river. And then it drains to the Atlantic Ocean. So all of that water draining half the state ended up there, and the flood was just devastating. It cost lives, and it cost, I mean, just for thousands of people, it was just unprecedented, just like the rainfall volumes. So the idea is, well, runoff is a big problem there. And where is that runoff coming from? So about the entire state is occupied by agricultural areas, very similar to here, soybeans, corn, wheat, and oats. And no-till is a common practice there. So most fields are cultivated under no-till, which we would expect is going to have that cover on the surface, going to protect from rainfall impact. We're going to have better structure in our soils. But what happens in reality is that we have a simplified version of no-till in most of those areas. And in the upper half of the state, we have these beautiful oxysols so deep, like 2 to 5 meters deep. But most often they are compacted at 20 centimeters. So all of that storage space just doesn't exist. And then rainfall occurs and we just cannot have all that water infiltrating the soil, and then runoff becomes a huge problem. So we have that happening in our rivers. It's gonna rain, they're gonna be completely red. And then when there's a drought period, well, there's nothing to sustain that base flow. And so we thought, well, what if no-till is really good and we do crop rotation and we do cover crops? So we monitored 8 agricultural hill slopes. They were all paired. And what we found out is even if we do the best no-till, the best soil health, there's still rainfall events that it's just not going to do it. Runoff still is going to happen. So in our very specific situation there, infiltration terraces are the best management practice for runoff. But those were just removed from crop fields when no-till was implemented, but that's just a long story. So that was a field scale. There's runoff. So what happens when we look at a watershed scale, and this is that same area, Guardamore River. I started monitoring in 2020, and then the data ends right before the big floods. And what we see is in the summer, these little rectangles, the water level is just very, very low. And then throughout the rest of the year, we have these events, and the whole thing is daily discharge, but the blue is base flow, orange is fast flow, so runoff. And I mean, a lot of that water is runoff. And then in late 2023, El Nino started. And El Nino in South Brazil means more rainfall. And well, okay, we're happy now because there's more rainfall. Everyone's really happy. But more rainfall when runoff's not controlled means a lot more floods. And about 40% of the precipitation water just turned into runoff. And when we look at these seasons over the years that we had monitored, we can see the dry La Nina, which is drought for us, dry La Nina summers. This is total input, so everything that precipitated. Blue is base flow, red is fast flow, and then gray is storage and evapotranspiration. Summer, nothing goes to the river. It's just mostly evapotranspiration. And then we do have times when there's some flow, but it's a lot of runoff, a lot of fast flow. And then El Nino hits, and we have like 700 millimeters in 3 months. Then the next 3 months, it's 800 millimeters. And nothing is going for storage and evapotranspiration. It's all in the river, and a lot of that is fast flow. So then when everyone wants water, there's no water. And the data stopped right by the floods. And I'm sorry, I'm over time. It stopped right at the big event because all of our equipment got washed away. And I mean, it was just a lot of gullies and mass movement and just a lot of really severe erosion happening. At the time, my advisor was there because we do manual monitoring. So he kept track of the points of what the water level was, and we were able to reconstruct the hydrograph. And then later on, we did the survey of the riverbed, and our river got wider, it got faster because there's less roughness. And now every time it rains, it's a lot different and a lot more erosive than it was before. So it's after everything was in place and there were lots of things that needed to be done for the monitoring gauge to be ready to monitor again. Yeah, each rainfall event is everyone's, okay, is this gonna wash away everything again or not? So the idea that I wanted to talk about in, well, 2 minutes shorter than this was that this is because we had, and this is not even long-term, but monitoring all of these things paints us this picture and enables us to get a better idea of the processes. And for us specifically, that was useful to reach out to public managers. We're able to train more than 160 technicians to implement some runoff management practices. Yeah, and so just wanted to share a bit of that monitoring, which I find really important. And if you want to read more, this journalist, Kim, she traveled to Brazil. She went to Guardamore River and she wrote this article that's on Manga Bay. So if you guys want to read and see a couple more pictures of what happened there, left a curricle. Sorry about the time, and thank you. Yes, sorry.
So is the flooding due to climate change or is it due to land use practices?
Yeah. Combination of both. So the rainfall volume, unprecedented. It would be a flood. It didn't matter what, because it was just too much rainfall. There are three rivers that drain, three main rivers that drain towards our capital city, and they have different concentration times. But because of how rainfall happened, they all discharged in that lake at the same time. So if we had management practices that would delay peak flow, so the volume is very hard to change the volume, but if we can delay the peak flow, then that magnitude of a flood would be maybe not as devastating.
They would naturally go into the one spot. That
Yeah.
wasn't changed.
No, that's not gonna change. They are gonna drain there. It's just you can manage water so it doesn't get there as fast. And at the same we model that there is a change in peak flow. So small in volume, but in peak flow, yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned no-till as a cause for subsoil compaction. Did I get it right?
Yeah, not exactly a cause, but we use this, or farmers use this simplified version of no-till. Basically, you're doing soybeans, fallow, wheat, oat, and that's it. You're not doing like a soybeans, corn, and like introducing root systems that will improve that structure and I mean just flow past for water. And then you're going into the field at any condition, not really caring if it's moist enough, moist or not moist. So it's a combination of lack of practices and just doing things.
So when you said simplified no-till, simplified means about the rotation.
Yeah, it's just sitting over a field that has not been tilled. But at least in our definition of no-till there, it's you're not going to till the soil. You're going to do crop rotation. So that means including corn in your rotation every 3 years. You're going to use cover crops. And you're not going to let a fallow period. You're not going to let your soil uncovered. In theory.
What's the cause of the heart pan again?
It's
Is it
the
natural or is it because of traffic on it?
naturally those soils don't have that.
Okay.
So it's the traffic and the crops. I mean, soybeans, they will have that one pipe photo. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And they're spaced at 45 centimeters. They're spaced at this. They're not exploring a lot of that soil. So there's just a lot of room for that compaction.
It's have soil in, they don't have too much biomagnetic. Yeah. Too much about.
Yeah.
You think tile drainage would help?
I think our problem is more the runoff. We do have soils that are deep enough in those oxysols.
Yeah.
Those oxysols, they are deep enough, they are deep, they have structure if they are well managed. So I don't think draining the subsurface would we have room to infiltrate. We can store that water. We don't need it going away. There are different soil types.
Did your field study confirm that depth of infiltration hunch you have about the compacted layer?
We did not evaluate that. We did a lot of physical analysis, but not at finding that depth. We did density, we did porosity at those layers surface, and then that B start of a B horizon. They usually have more clay there too. So it's
Great.
thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay. Last but not least, welcome Sarah Wilson, who's a PhD student in my lab.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to come talk to me, I'm wearing field clothes because, well, at least I changed and I didn't, but we collected some really cool red clays in St. Paul this morning.
Fun.
It's really cool. So I want somebody to come talk to me about it. So come talk to me about it. Maybe Elise too. Yeah, so like Anna said, my name's Sarah Patterson. I'm a second year PhD student in the Land and Atmospheric Sciences Department, co-advised by Dr. Anna Cates, but then also Dr. Josh Campbell in the back. Today I'm going to be giving you all the dirt on disturbance, which is my fun catchphrase that I do, but really I'll be talking about how we might be able to improve soil carbon stores on conservation grasslands through strategic management practices. So like I mentioned, my work largely focuses on conservation grasslands in southeastern Minnesota. And grasslands are the world's largest terrestrial carbon store. They store about 34% of all below ground carbon. So we like them. They're really, really important and we want to keep them where they are. But we have been documenting over the past few decades that land use change, so taking these grasslands out of their natural ecosystem and into annual cropping systems, we lose most of that carbon. So all of that is being mineralized and being brought into our atmosphere and contributes to the big positive feedback loop that is climate change. And we want to try and reverse that. So really the questions are now is when we take that annual cropland and we put it back into a grassland system, are we recuperating those carbon stores? Or more, are we on the way to recuperating those carbon stores? Because this will take us a very long time. And really the main question is how do we strategically manage these conservation grasslands to do this? Because there are different ways that we can manage them and not all lead to increased carbon stores. And this is where we enter the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. It's what I study. It's going to haunt me forever. And it's a really interesting program. So CRP takes degraded agricultural land, of course, out of production and instead has landowners plant a series of perennials across it to really try and reduce soil erosion. And it has a really passive management style. So there's really only infrequent mowing every 5 years. And other than that, there's really no disturbance on the system. And we have it really well documented that it does improve erosion, which is what the program was made to do. But it's kind of a black box on what's happening in terms of the biology happening underground. We really know very little about soil health factors, soil carbon factors, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a 40-year-old program, so it's kind of a lost opportunity. And one of the things that I really got interested in when Anna told me that we would be working on CRP is the role of disturbance in soil health. And whether or not this really passive, minimal disturbance system was in fact leading to the soil health outcomes that we expected, or if maybe more medium disturbances were the better route. We already kind of know that heavy tillage, like Elise says, is not necessarily the route that we want to go on. And so to start answering this, I set out to compare a series of soil health metrics across different management types. And ignore most of this because this is supposed to be a 5-minute talk. All you really need to know is that these are 3 different biological factors and more is better for all of them. So we want to see increased values for all 3 of these metrics. And my green box plot here is my rotationally grazed sites. And then to the right, we have short-term CRP in yellow, and then in the blue, long-term CRP, or CRP for 10 plus years. And across all 3 metrics that I'm showing you here, we can see that rotationally grazed sites have higher values. And that was really very interesting to me and caused me to ask a lot of questions about why passive management wasn't outperforming this grazing management system. And what is the role in disturbance in all of this? What are the mechanisms behind these kind of things that we're seeing? And so to answer these more mechanistic questions, I ran a controlled greenhouse experiment where I collected large intact soil cores and I brought them back here and ran a series of 4 different disturbance or clipping events. So I was the cow. And I was tracking soil carbon and root data. So really trying to understand how carbon is being allocated differently in response to disturbance and then over the series of the multiple different disturbances. And then this summer, hopefully I'll be putting cattle on land enrolled in CRP and really getting a look at what's happening in realistic conditions. And then comparing those cattle grazing treatments to also above ground shoot removal, really to isolate the effect of the different two. Obviously, cattle bring in a whole series of other beneficial things like manure and saliva and selective grazing. And so they can bring different consequences. And this data is really, really exciting to me, but there are some caveats. So we know soil carbon takes decades to respond. I mentioned we might be waiting for the next few centuries to get that carbon that we lost back. And so we're likely capturing a lot of what I call the rhizosphere priming phase, and others we might be mineralizing more carbon into the atmosphere than we are storing it in the short term. But really the hope is that we're going to see mechanisms that tell us that we're eventually going to get increased organomineral interactions and therefore more long-term stable carbon if these studies lasted for 10 years and if I was in my doctoral program for another 10 years, which I won't be. And so, I mean, this matters to so many reasons for me. That's why I'm, doing this as my topic. But I really think the main two, of course, are urgency. I mean, climate goals demand that we have action now, but we are managing 23 million acres of CRP nationwide with decades-old guidelines that weren't really built with soil health and soil carbon in mind. Remember that erosion goal. And farmers and land managers are really starting to ask for more updated research on kind of what's going on the land that they're, choosing to enroll in these programs. And then also impact. So again, bring back to that black box. We have really little experimental data on CRP land. And again, to me, clearly this is a really big lost opportunity. And I believe that this work and hopefully others that come after will transform this passive conservation system into a more active carbon restoration management. Whew. Yeah, that's all. And I'm still over 5 minutes. So. Yeah, Tara.
Thanks for this. Could you say more about the plant communities that are always here?
I could. I've been thinking about this a lot. So my first 2 years of data, so the box plots that you were seeing, and then also my intact soil cores are on cool season grasses and legumes. So smooth brome grass, maybe some alfalfa, but probably mostly smooth brome grass because it chokes out a lot of it. And then what I'll be doing my actual in-field cattle grazing experiment on will be warm season grasses and legumes. So most likely big blue stem, Indian grass, maybe a legume that survived there too. And they do have different carbon allocation systems. That's a very long conversation though, so I maybe won't bore you, but one is more likely, in my opinion, to have long-term carbon storage than the other. Yeah.
Is it a secret which one?
No, it's C4. C4, warm season grasses are more likely to store more long-term carbon because they have increased amino acids and organic acids in their exudates, which go right to organomineral interactions typically. Yeah, which you guys will hear about later this year.
In your greenhouse experiments, you were clipping your samples. Do you think there's a compaction or what other?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why we want to do the in-field comparison between cattle grazing and then me just going out and removing above ground biomass, because cattle do also trample, and that does play a role in terms of what's happening below ground. I mean, I wasn't stomping on them myself, so we might have compacted a little too in the process of collecting those soil cores. We tried really very hard not to, but every experiment is flawed, and especially this is really degraded sloped soils. So we were probably on a 15% slope when we took them. So it's pretty difficult to get these samples. And yeah, it's hard to control for everything. But yes, I do think there's compaction in cattle grazing.
What about the manure? Are you accounting for that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, so
How's that?
in my greenhouse study, I wasn't really necessarily intending it to be a direct reflection of what cattle grazing would look like, but more how is this system responding to any disturbance at all? It hadn't been disturbed in 30+ years. And so I think we're learning something really interesting just in the short-term response to that disturbance that hadn't happened in a long time. But again, like the manure aspect is part of why we want to have that isolation treatment for next year, because not everyone owns cattle. So some farmers might just want to mow their land more. And that alone could be, you know, something that we could say is beneficial or maybe is not really doing anything when compared with cattle grazing. Yeah, Casey.
Yeah, so, are there kind of geographic GIS analysis of CRP in terms of soil and geomorphology? And are they different from the soils being actively used, for example?
Well, I don't know if we could find GIS data because it is private land, even though it's like in a public program. So I don't know if there would be any maps that you could specifically look at. I know I was not allowed to share my address locations with my CRP landowners, but I do know that it is probably the land that isn't well suited for agricultural production. That's probably why farmers are putting it in the program, because it's a money pit anyways. So we can assume that we're going to have lower carbon stores anyway, worse soil health, poorer soils in general, because it's pretty degraded. There are a series of requirements that you have to meet in order to enroll in the program, and most of them involve your soil being pretty poor.
So is it correct that there's no agency that collects the CRP and GIS data?
No, there is. He's just saying it's not public.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you could probably get it if you had a research agreement with them, but you can't get it on the internet tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. And talk to me about my play. It's cool.
All right, yeah.
Okay, I should remember the name. I've already And we also have some of the CFP part. Okay, we do not have seminar next week. We do have one the 8th, I think, and that is, oh yeah, that is going to be a really good presentation about our long-term ecological research site in the Twin Cities from Dr. Jackson Finlay. So that should be great. And the week after that, we have a visiting scholar, Matt Yost from Utah State. So we'll get a schedule out pretty soon for people who might want to meet with him. Thank you.
That was great. And your start.
Think maybe? I don't remember.
Because I believe I had been like 10 years ago. Yeah, maybe it's different.